Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Catholic Education Foundation podcast number 24. This podcast will feature Kelly Taylor, co-founder of Lexington-based Trek Advancement, along with Catholic Education Foundation President Rich Lechleiter. How are we doing today?
Great. Thanks, Steve.
We're doing awesome. Thanks. Good to see you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here. And Rich, so we talked yesterday. So the title of this podcast is Tax Advantage Charitable Giving Strategies That You Should Know. Now, Kelly's an expert.
Yes, that's why she's here.
Kelly's an expert, so if you're listening to this podcast, we're going to give you all kinds of awesome things, awesome ways to really make an impact at the end of the year, right, Kelly?
Absolutely.
Okay, but before we get there, let's start with some housekeeping things. So it's so good of you to join us. Let's start the conversation by letting our listeners get to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself.
Well, I think first thing to know about me is I am an activator. I'm all like, this is what you want to do? Let's get it done, right? I think the second important thing as it pertains to our podcast today is that I'm a plan giving nerd. How long do we have for this podcast?
Yeah, well, listen, I can relate to that. I'm kind of a sports nerd, so and I say that all the time.
I can talk for days.
So that's why. Hey, that's why you're here. That's why you're the expert. So let's dive into it. Let's go.
Love it.
Kelly, so how did you get started in the nonprofit world, and what attracted you to it? I heard you say law school.
Uh-huh.
So obviously you took a little bit of a detour here.
Well, kind of. I'll tell you about that.
All right.
Yeah. So I think it started, I know it started when I was an undergraduate at University of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And my mom was a professor at University of Kentucky, so I kind of grew up in that higher education environment. Okay. And one of my sorority sisters said, hey, Kelly, you should check out this organization called Student Development Council. I had no idea what that meant.
Right.
But I did. I joined and learned about the importance of development, fundraising, and the role of a nonprofit organization, albeit a large nonprofit, the University of Kentucky. Right. And I interned in the office. I was basically, ran errands, but I learned about plan giving there. Okay. And I always wanted to go to law school, but I was really intrigued by this idea of utilizing tax advantage giving, charitable gift planning. So I went to law school knowing I wanted to do plan giving, which is kind of an anomaly, actually.
That is an anomaly. How about that?
I went to law school all the way here in Louisville, Kentucky. I went all the way from Lexington to Louisville. And
University of Louisville?
University of Louisville.
Okay. Yeah.
And did a special course on tax aspects of charitable giving. Okay. So when I went to go get a job, I could tell people why I went to law school and what I wanted to do. Sure. So that kind of took me into higher education. Okay. And I started my career at Harvard University and got to work
Not a bad place to start.
Yeah, it's a pretty good gig, actually. my first job.
I was Kelly from Kentucky.
All right, I'll bet.
And because I was the only person.
Did you have an accent when you were there? Did people act like, hey, man, she has a southern accent?
No, they would say, you don't have an accent. And I was kind of upset. Because I was born and raised here. I thought I had an accent. But no, everyone knew me as Kelly from Kentucky because I was a bit of an anomaly. And I got to work in charitable gift planning there. And it was like the master class. Okay. And from there, moved back to Kentucky. Right. And I worked at University of Louisville, Brown Cancer Center, also as the interim plan giving director for the university, and met my now business partner. And we decided, hey, we should make this happen.
Awesome. Yeah. And so the rest is history. And you guys are doing extremely well with it, right?
Yeah.
When did you guys start Trek?
It'll be 14 years in January.
Wow, 14.
I know.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Fantastic. Yeah, I know. I can't believe it.
Rich, how did the foundation end up connecting with Kelly and Trek?
Yeah, we were looking to kind of launch into another stratosphere, if you will, in terms of our giving, plan giving, endowment building, because we spent a long time and we worked very hard on current needs, how to fill the bill for today, right? How to fund our kids next fall. And that's been consuming for many, many years. And with the growth that we had over the last 10 years, that was a tall order to keep up with. So we didn't spend really any time with our donors about plan giving. I mean, we couldn't even spell it, right? So we needed somebody to bring about kind of bring in-house a structure by which we could learn how to do that and make that part of our MO every day. Sure. And we had heard about Kelly and Brooks through Charlie Dahlem, our former board chair. Sure.
Charlie's been on our podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Charlie chaired the the campaign at Hospice here in Louisville, and you were a consultant to that organization, very successfully, by the way. And we didn't really know who to contact in Louisville, and he mentioned, hey, you guys ought to meet the folks from Trek, and we did, and I think we kind of hit it off instantly.
Awesome.
And that was about almost 4 years ago. Yeah. And we've been steadily building our resources at the foundation, and we'll talk a little bit later about the strategy around that, but they've been a fantastic addition to our team.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, what are some of the organizations that Trek has assisted?
So, as Rich mentioned, we have several clients here in Louisville. We have clients in Lexington as well, but we have clients all over the country.
Okay.
I would say, obviously, foundations. So much like Catholic Education Foundation that raises money, our grant makers, we have several of those types of organizations that we work with, whether they be member organization foundations or community foundations. We have a pretty large portfolio in that space.
Okay.
We have some clients in the higher education space
All
doing
right.
campaigns.
Yep.
We have had clients from DC to North Dakota all the way to Pasadena, California.
Okay.
So while we're a small and mighty boutique firm here in Kentucky, we get on planes and travel and work with people all over the country.
Kelly, so I'm curious. In my business, you know, when you've been in it for a number of years, you kind of learn what to do and what not to do. Have you guys been in some up and downs with these campaigns? Have you always been successful, or there's some times where like it wasn't what you wanted or expected?
Well, if our clients aren't successful, we aren't successful.
No, I understand that, sure.
And so our firm is called Trek Advancement, and we say that we're the Sherpa, we're the guide of the mountain. And when an organization aspires to change and evolve and has a big, bold vision that they're going after, that requires a lot of change.
Yeah.
And while we bring significant expertise in fundraising and charitable gift planning and endowment building, it's really about helping an organization evolve and change.
Okay.
And so I wouldn't say there's ever been any failures.
Right.
Because we're very careful to pace them along very specific milestones.
Got it.
Sometimes it might take longer. Right?
Right.
Sometimes it might go faster. But a lot of it is making sure that we're pacing them to success. And
Sure.
so the fundamental of what we do is help that organization go from here to here and be able to sustain that over the long haul.
Okay, so let's talk about the foundation then. Have you ever run across an organization that is as dynamic as the Catholic Education Foundation?
Oh, I love this question. So I said I'm an activator, right? That's my strength, my number one strength. And I have to say, usually as an activator, I'm the one pulling people or pushing people, right? Well, if you know Rich, which I know you do, he's usually the one pulling or pushing us.
He's a pretty, in my mind, he's a pretty good activator.
I love that. And I love that about not only Rich, but the whole team.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
so committed. They are a dynamic, small, very impactful team. And that's what I love about Rich as the leader of that team is that he is, you know, usually I'm the one saying, come on, we can do this, right? And he's like, oh no, Kelly, we could do more, we could do better.
Well, that's what a successful leader does,
Absolutely.
though, right? And I'm sure
Absolutely.
you've seen that in other organizations as well, right?
Absolutely. It's all about leadership.
Yeah.
You know, having really solid leadership in an organization really does make all the difference.
Yeah. So, Rich, has the foundation used consultants like Trek in the past?
You know, when we were formed back in the 90s, mid-90s, there was a kind of a diocesan-wide campaign to start building the original endowment. And we used a local firm to kind of guide us through that. But since then, no, we really haven't. It's kind of been, again, hand-to-mouth, kind of homemade stuff. And quite honestly, thanks to our donors, very successful.
Oh, yeah.
But we needed, again, we've got to think about 10 and 20 years down the road for this organization. How do we sustain what we're doing? How do we grow what we're doing?
Right.
And try to minimize that risk. There's a lot of risk today in the Catholic Education Foundation. We're so small. Julie and I and Ashley are our only fundraisers, if you will. There's only 7 of us in the office.
Right.
So,
Right.
and we have, I would say, a higher concentration of larger donors and not enough smaller donors. So that there's all kinds of risk associated with that. And Kelly's right. We had to kind of change the way we operate. And I would tell you this. We've been working together for 3 years now. There have been so many different changes in the way we operate, some subtle, some significant, but it's a different place than it was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And all due credit to Brooks and Kelly, for sure.
Well, that's awesome. All right. So Kelly, like I said, we got a very specific title to this one.
That's
so
right.
what I want to do is try to give our listeners some knowledge here. Let's drop some knowledge so that I know you have, because like you said, you're a nerd about this. So,
I am. I'm a nerd.
All right, let me start with this question. We'll see where it takes us. We're obviously approaching the end of the calendar year. Let's talk about the various ways the donors or potential donors can help grow the mission of the foundation through tax advantage strategies.
Absolutely. We are entering the season of giving, and most people, if they haven't already, are starting to think about that as you get the end of year appeals, having those conversations with various nonprofits you support. This is a really important time to be thinking about not only the affinity that you have for those organizations, but how you can capitalize or expand your financial capacity to support those organizations.
Okay.
And that's often through tax advantage giving vehicles. So the first one I think most people would know about, but it always bears repeating, is appreciated securities. Right. So looking at the end of the year, if you have some highly appreciated securities, rather than selling those, paying the capital gains tax, by gifting those directly to CF or a nonprofit of your choice, you're avoiding that capital gains tax and giving dollar for dollar to the organizations you care about. So fundamentally, that is an important place to start looking as you're planning your end of year giving.
Rich, does that make sense? Is that something you've seen?
We've had several of them just this week, one today for a pretty large amount of appreciated stock. And that's becoming, as we're growing the organization and we're talking to people about multi-year commitments, for example, we talk to them specifically about, hey, if you've got a portfolio of securities you've had for a while, you've got some really large gains embedded in there, think about starting with that. And so that's part of the conversation we use right off the bat, particularly for 5 and 10-year commitments that we want people to make.
Okay.
So it's working.
Absolutely. And it's looking at it's looking beyond the cash assets. So about 7% of Americans' wealth is held in cash. 93% are non-cash assets.
Interesting.
So the key here is when you're talking to donors about their capacity to give, is to make sure you're not just talking about the 7% cash, but those 93% assets. And this is a great example, and it's a very simple way to give. In high income earning years, something that donors will often think about is coupling a securities gift, because it has a different percentage that you can take as your deduction, with a cash gift, so that you can take the most charitable deduction in those higher income earning years. And it's okay if you max out that 1 year in your charitable gift and the deduction you can make, because you can carry that forward for 5 subsequent years on your taxes.
Okay.
So these are just some strategies to be thinking about as you look at your own financial situation and where the most tax advantage gifts should come from.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that there are limits within the tax code. There are actual limits each year of how much you can deduct for charity, mostly based on your income, certain percentages of your income. And it varies, and the percentages vary between cash and non-cash gifts. So a lot of people don't know about those limits. They may straddle them every once in a while. So we talk to people about that as well.
Yep. Now, Kelly, do you find that when people sit down with their accountants or maybe even their financial advisors, that they get the proper advice here on what to do with these things?
Yeah, well, research actually shows the majority of donors get their charitable giving advice from their accountants.
From their actual accountants?
From their accountants. The majority of high net worth, there's a study of high net worth individuals, and the majority of them do get their charitable information, charitable gift planning information from their accountants.
Okay.
So sometimes, though, if your accountants aren't bringing some of these issues to your attention, they may just making assumptions that you don't have any charitable priorities. So sometimes it's important to proactively talk to your advisors about your charitable intentions on an annual basis, but also as you look at your entire estate.
So when you say charitable priorities, talk to me about that a little bit. So is this something that people can take advantage of? So it's not so much, all right, I have this money and I want to do something with it, but I have all this money and I should be doing something with it because it's going to benefit myself.
Right. Well, we know, number one, the tax incentives have maybe in the top 5 reasons why people make charitable gifts. The number one reason is that they were asked and they see a compelling need, right? So But we know tax incentives do play into that kind of assessment. And we know this because the tax policy for income tax deductions changed not too long ago, where the standard deduction, those that take the standard deduction in their income taxes aren't really incentivized to give to 501c3 nonprofits because they don't need the charitable deduction.
Makes sense.
So we're actually seeing the kind of ripple effects on the lower level donors, or that kind of like small level donor in our charitable giving.
Yeah.
And so that might say that they're not receiving a tax advantage, so maybe they're not incentivized to give to the traditional types of charities.
Yeah, and I would say too, even within our own experience the last 3 years, for example, our revenues have grown every year. So our revenues keep climbing, but if you look down under the hood, we have a smaller number of donors today than we did 3 years ago. And to Kelly's point, it's at that lower level. It's $100, $250, $500. Again, I think part of that's driven by the change in the tax code around the standard deduction.
Yep. And that's the lifeblood of nonprofits, really. Right. That loyal, consistent $25, $100 donor, that is so critically important to the annual operations of any organization, nonprofit organization. And when those go away over time, that does create a sustainability concern.
All right. So, listen, I'm in my early 40s.
Okay.
I have a lot of parents who have kids in private schools and, may have decent jobs or whatever it be, but they look at themselves as, I can't be a donor. I can't do that. I don't make enough money to do that. But really the answer is they're kind of wrong there, right?
Right. The answer is always yes.
The answer is always yes. Hey, good job.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Well, I think that's a fair point, T, because we're in the same situation, right? We have kids, paying for school, paying for all these things. But we know that everything that we're doing maybe for our children's school isn't completely being covered by tuition and fees.
Right.
That there are subsidies that need to go and support that education or allowing other children to have access to the same education.
Sure.
And this is where the idea of every gift counts. If it's $25 or $100, it matters.
It matters.
It really does. In aggregate, it absolutely matters. And even if you feel you're pinched because obviously economic factors, inflation is a concern, but really thinking and going back to your conversation about or your mention of priorities is, where am I seeing, good being done, and where do I want to continue to invest and further that? That's important.
Gotcha.
At whatever level you're giving.
Yeah, it's really, we I think do a good job of telling the story. In other words, if you invest in us, what do you get? What's the product? What's the output? And I've found that to be really effective with any donor. And for us, look, and we need more younger donors at the foundation. Everybody does, right? You need people in their 30s and 40s to get started. And we when we meet with folks in that age bracket, we don't ask for big numbers. We don't even go there. We ask them to start with us.
Right.
$100, $250. That's great. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Because the key, and Kelly's taught me this, the key is you've got to get people on board the train. Get them on the train, and they'll stay on the train. But you have to educate them about why they should do this and what the mission is. And I've always said since I've been here and before that we, as a foundation, we have this great product called Catholic Schools. It's fantastic, and that's for me. That's an easy sell, right? I'm a Catholic school kid myself. My kids all went to Catholic school, so I can sell that product to anybody, whether that's a donor or whether that's a family who's considering going to a Catholic school who can't afford it. It's the same story.
Well, that's obviously impactful, and I think that goes back to the every gift counts mantra,
Absolutely.
right? And that's trying to get people involved kind of at whatever level they can get involved in. Kelly, is there any other strategies that maybe people should know?
Absolutely. And kind of going back to our tax policy changes, many individual donors 65 and older, which actually makes up for about 70% of the money given in the United States, comes from donors 65 and older. So this is a really important group.
In the entire United States?
In the entire United States.
Wow, okay.
It's compelling.
Right? Yeah. So this is a group that's, as they reach 70 and a half, are getting close to that ability, or if they're in 70 and a half, to unlocking the power of their retirement assets to make gifts now.
Okay.
So right now, if you're 70 and a half, you can use your traditional IRA to make up to $100,000 in gifts to charitable organizations each year. And actually, they just adjusted that number for inflation for 2024, so it's going to be $105,000 a year. And this is really compelling because, remember, we were talking about the changes in the tax policy. Well, many of these folks are retired, and they're no longer taking the itemized deduction. They're doing the standard deduction, so they don't, again, have that charitable deduction incentive. And so they can use this asset, make gifts from that custodian directly to their charitable organizations like CEF, and it bypasses their income. They don't get a deduction, but they don't have to pay income tax on it, and it goes straight to the organization. This is huge.
Yeah. Otherwise, if you're making a monthly draw out of your traditional IRA, that goes in your gross income. You're going to pay tax on that. Okay. If you can gift it directly to a CEF or another organization directly from your IRA, it never passes through your hands. There is no income tax consequence to you on that.
It's the best gift. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
It's big.
Yeah.
I mean, do people know about this, or is that kind of like one of these little things under the rug?
I think it's starting to get around.
Yes. I think this one, we've only been at it for maybe like 8 years, and they finally codified it a couple of years ago. But we're seeing it pick up across the board. I think people are turning 70 half every day, and just being aware that this is the best asset for them to utilize for their giving right now.
Yeah, Tom Perrone at Morgan Stanley, who has lots of clients that are 65 and above, right? He's told me, particularly in the last 2 years, there's been a huge pickup in his book of business for what she's just talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah, very.
So there's a new kind of wrinkle with the Secure Act 2.0 that just happened at the end of last year related to qualified charitable distributions that hasn't gained as much steam, but is starting to. As I mentioned, I think to you earlier, Wall Street Journal just had an article this summer that in Secure Act 2.0, it allows people to take those qualified charitable distributions, so 70 and a half or older, take those $50,000 of those qualified charitable distributions and put them in what we call a life income gift. And the example of that would be a charitable gift annuity. And so effectively, a charitable gift annuity is, I think of it as an endowment that pays you and your spouse while you're living. And at the end of your life, that becomes an endowment for like a CEF. And so that's a relatively new tax policy change that can have tremendous impact for financial planning for individuals and their charitable organizations.
Yeah, so that's like a charitable remainder trust kind of, right?
There's charitable, it can go to a charitable
It's
remainder
sorta like
trust
that,
or a gift annuity.
Yeah.
So the gift annuity is just an annuity. It's a contract between the donor and the organization. And a remainder trust can be variable or it can be fixed income, and that's just a trust.
But you can now, it's at $50,000 a year
$50,000, and it's gonna
that you
be
can
adjusted
take
53
from your
next year.
IRA essentially and put in this separate fund
And receive income.
and receive income from that, which is taxable.
It is taxable.
Right. And then you make a distribution later to the charity.
Yeah.
Wow.
At your death, it becomes effectively an endowment for the charity.
This is fascinating stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. It's a world I know nothing about, but it's obviously fascinating stuff. Rich, as we talk about all this and we think about all the different ways that our donors can help, right? What are the foundation's ambitions for the new year, and how much do we need to grow to fulfill them?
Yeah, thanks. We've been on a pretty fast trajectory the last, particularly the last 7 years. We've gone from 1,500 kids a year 10 years ago that we were helping to now 3,700. The funding's gone up to $8 million, both of which are records. So this thing's kind of gone like this, okay? And what we want to do is we don't want it to flatline, okay? Because what you see in a lot of nonprofits over time, they reach a certain level and then they kind of go like this.
Yep.
So what are we going to do to keep up this trajectory? So we came up with a plan to ultimately reach and help 5,000 kids a year. All right, so that's almost 50% growth from where we are today. Now, that's going to take a boatload of money. If you think about 1,300 more kids at roughly today's dollars, $2,000 a kid, that's an enormous annual obligation on us. So what we have to do is obviously ramp up annual fund giving, no question about it. But we've got to build the endowment of this organization. That's our future. So today, our endowment is around $30 million, which is good. And we draw about $1 million a year to fund our kids. But based on the work we're doing now with Kelly over the next 5 years, we've got multi-million-dollar amounts coming into the foundation, into the endowment. So that 30 grows to 40, grows to 50. And for example, in the first quarter of 24, we've already got commitments for $3.5 million more fresh new dollars that are going to come into the endowment. So the key for us over time is to take that $30 million, and this is our future. Take that $30 million and make it 100, so that each year we can draw $4 million from the endowment to help our kids rather than one, and it can sustain itself over a long period of time. That is our future. One of the ways that we're going to get there is through planned giving. Mm-hmm. So we've already gotten, I think we're almost at 20 million of planned giving commitments that we've obtained in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't know when it's going to come in, but ultimately it will. And that making that investment with our donors today over time creates an organization that can sustain itself, help 5,000 kids. And by the way, the next ambition is to go into the high schools. Okay, so right now we do K through 8 in 39 elementary schools.
That's
there's
so
9,
important.
yeah, and there's 9 high schools out there with 6,000 students in them. And what we see more and more is that families we support through grade school, they can't make the jump.
Yeah.
The price goes up.
It's a big jump.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big jump. The price goes up, and sometimes the high schools can get it done, but sometimes they can't. Mm-hmm. And the schools that have less fundraising capabilities, what we ultimately want to do is come in and kind of fill the gap. Here's an example. Holy Cross High School, tuition's $14,000.
Okay.
The school can come up with, I'm making the numbers up, the school can come up with $6,000.
Okay.
The family can pay $4,000. That's all they can pay. So we're at $10,000. So there's a $4,000. Typically the gap's $3,000 to $5,000.
Right.
What's the typical gap? Nobody's there to fund the gap right now.
No, nobody's there to fill that gap.
So the kid can't really go to Holy Cross in that case. Can't go to DeSales. Can't go to Pres. Whatever. We see it kind of across the board. So I think strategically what we want to do is take our kids who are in the 8th grade, kind of journey with them forward into high school and work with the high schools, obviously, to figure out, okay, where are the gaps?
Yeah.
And be able to fund those gaps for that kid for the next 4 years. And in that way, I mean, that's like a grand slam, because that kid got to go through K through 8 with us and with our funding partners, and go to a Catholic high school with the high school and us. I mean, it's the perfect journey for any young kid. And we've always had a hole in our strategy over the years in that we had to focus on the grade schools.
Right.
But now it's time to expand beyond it. And those are our big drivers going forward.
Kelly, I know your wheels are turning there. How do we do this? How do we get this thing to 100 million?
Well, like Rich said, the big thing, the way we build endowments is really through those deferred gifts. The biggest gifts come through those deferred gifts. So people using their retirement plans as a testamentary gift, or life insurance as a testamentary gift, or their estate, anything from their estate as a testamentary gift. That's what moves the needle.
Oh, yeah.
And endowment is truly the gift that keeps on giving in perpetuity. So one of the things we have to look at are those that are really supporting CF on an annual basis, and what that would require of an endowment to sustain it, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 50.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what it's going to take. And it's going to take everyone thinking it's not just the now, but it's the later. And what's that legacy look like for each donor?
Yeah, and again, we've done, thanks be to God and our donors, we've done a nice job of annual fundraising, and that's what we had to do. But now we got to do that plus some, and the plus some will build up an endowment that it'll reach $100 million. We're going to do it.
Well, under Rich's watch, I think anything's capable.
That's right.
Kelly, thank you for teaming up with Rich and Julie and the rest of the foundation team to create more opportunities for young students and to gain access to the greatest educational experience ever, Catholic education. Thank you for being here, Kelly. This was awesome. I think our listeners will get a lot out of this.
Thanks, Teague. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah,
Happy
you
to
did
be
a great
here.
job, and thank you for your partnership and your friendship.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rich, as we head into the end of the year, what's your favorite holiday greeting that means the most to those we serve?
The answer is yes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back next month for episode number 25.